So 2019 was a year of ups and downs for movies. For every high-profile film that was good or great, there was another one that was mediocre to flat-out bad. So honestly, it took me a little longer to make my list this year. I usually take a little bit of time anyway to try and catch up on some of the movies I missed before doing my top 10 list, but this year, even most of those ended up being underwhelming or disappointing. So in this video, I'm just going to discuss the 10 best movies I saw in 2019, in no real order, aside from maybe the last few. And I'm going to start things off with El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Now, this is a movie I was really looking forward to ever since they announced it earlier in 2019. I was a really big fan of Breaking Bad when it aired. It's been often lauded as one of the best, if not the best, live-action TV show of all time, and I would have to agree that it's certainly in the conversation, especially considering how Game of Thrones ended. And I did a whole retrospective with Real Talk over on my channel, if you want to see that. But with El Camino, it had a really high standard to live up to. However, Vince Gilligan was able to do a really great job and pull it off by giving us a very satisfying conclusion to Jesse Pinkman's story, which was left open at the end of Breaking Bad. It was well directed, well shot, well written, had a lot of great tension, and the acting was top notch as usual. And it was really nice to see another story set in the Breaking Bad world. Specifically afterward, as opposed to before it, which we've been getting with Better Call Saul. It's a movie that a lot of fans feel like didn't need to be made, but considering it did get made and it ended up being great, I think it's fine existing and is must-see for a Breaking Bad fan. Next up is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's newest movie. And Tarantino is one of my absolute favorite directors of all time, with some of my favorite movies of all time including Kill Bill, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, and the list goes on. I've seen all of his movies time and time again, including ones I don't really care for, such as Death Proof. So going into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I was really excited and anticipating the movie, and overall I think it was certainly a good movie that was really well made, and stood out among most of the pack of 2019, which is something you would expect from a Tarantino movie. However, I do feel like the movie went on too long, it lingered in certain areas way too long as well. There were way too many gratuitous shots, especially when it came to women's feet, which you expect in a Tarantino movie, but not to this degree. And although it did have a really great ending, which is some of the most fun I had in theaters the entire year, I would have to say overall that it's one of his weaker films. However, even with that in mind, it's still one of the best movies of 2019, which says a lot about just how talented of a director this guy is. And speaking of all-time great directors, the next movie on this list is The Irishman, directed by Martin Scorsese. And again, just like with Tarantino, Scorsese is a great director who has made some amazing movies over the course of his career, such as Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Wolf of Wall Street. And The Irishman is another great addition to his filmography. Being a movie that was made for Netflix, it's certainly something that stands out this year as an epic crime drama that brings together actors like Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino, and a host of others, telling the story about Robert De Niro's character as he raises through the ranks of the mob, gets involved with Jimmy Hoffa, and does some really terrible things along the way. It's well directed, well shot, and pretty much everything you would expect from a Martin Scorsese movie. However, this movie is very long, being around 3.5 hours in length, so it's something you pretty much have to set aside your whole afternoon or day for just to watch. And I feel like maybe certain things could have been trimmed here and there, and considering how long the movie is, certain characters could have been a little bit better developed, but overall it's classic Martin Scorsese and definitely worth checking out for fans of his films. Up next is John Wick 3, Parabellum, and it's another movie that I was really anticipating in 2019, because I've really enjoyed the John Wick movies so far. They're a throwback to 1980s and 90s classic action movies, with the singular badass gunslinger going on a personal tale of revenge and then getting caught up in the repercussions of his actions. And John Wick 3 wanted to carry that over in a really big way. As with the ending of John Wick 2, we were left in a situation where John was being chased by pretty much every assassin in the world, trying to collect a bounty on him. And so in John Wick 3, we were left in a situation where he was continually chased by a number of different assassins lessons throughout the film, trying to kill him, and then with him being given an offer that could bring everything to an end. However, it results in him coming to his own moral crossroads and having to make a really tough decision come the end, which was to be expected considering the direction of Chad Stahelski, as well as the fight coordinators from the Raid movies, who are incredibly talented. With that being said, I feel like the story was probably the weakest in this film of the three. And in terms of that aspect, it might be the weakest of the three overall, with 2 still being my favorite. With that being said, it's still an awesome rated R action movie with some great action that I definitely recommend checking out, along with the other 2. Up next is Ford v Ferrari, which is a racing movie that was directed by James Mangold, the director of films such as Logan, The Wolverine, and 3:10 to Yuma, and starring Matt Damon and of course Christian Bale. Now, going into this movie, I didn't really know what to expect. I thought it looked really good from the trailers and other material, and I suspected that there would be some good performances from the lead actors, and James Mangold has a really good record as a director. But with that being said, the movie ended up surpassing all of my expectations and being one of the best movies of the year. Telling the real-life story of the American car designer Carroll Shelby, who is also a legendary driver, as well as the other legendary driver Ken Miles, as they work together with Ford in order to build a car that will allow them to win the Le Mans race in the 1960s, a race that was continually won by Ferrari and their drivers. But despite the setup, the movie isn't really made in a way to where it's propaganda for the Ford company, and it does question many of the executive decisions made by that company during the events of the film. But overall, I think that this film did a really good job not only having some exciting racing sequences, but telling the story of the friendship between Shelby and Ken Miles with excellent performances by Matt Damon and especially Christian Bale, who is one of the best actors of this generation, and 2 actors who have been classic movie after classic movie. So for fans of racing, cars, and racing movies, you should definitely check this one out. The next movie on this list is Shazam, the good Captain Marvel movie that came out this year. And I was really excited for this movie when it came out. Even though DC has had kind of a hit or miss record as of late, I was always a fan of Captain Marvel, the real one, in the DC comics, as well as the animated series such as Justice League and Young Justice when he made his appearances. The concept of a young human boy who's given the power of gods and becomes an adult superhero is a pretty awesome idea. That's some great escapism, especially for kids, which is one of the reasons I always liked his character. Of course, this can be a really wacky concept, and DC definitely ran with that in this movie, taking the campy factor and turning it up pretty high, but in a way that complemented the story and all of the elements that were in it. I thought Zachary Levi did a great job playing the adult Billy Batson in Shazam. It was a very similar performance to Tom Hanks in the movie Big, where you could definitely believe that he was a child in an adult's body. And I also liked how the director David F. Sandberg, who was mostly known for doing horror movies before this, injected some of that horror style into the film, especially when it came to the 7 deadly sins and that great boardroom scene. Plus, he's also a YouTuber, so I'm very much willing to go out and support another YouTuber who's pursuing their dreams of making films, especially a big one like this. And on the topic of superhero movies, the next one I wanted to bring up is Avengers Endgame, which was the climax to everything that the MCU had built up to that point in the so-called Infinity Saga, where the Avengers sought to undo everything in Avengers Infinity War and put an end to Thanos once and for all. This movie was a very satisfying conclusion to everything that had been built up to that point, taking our favorite heroes and showing what became of them after their greatest loss in Infinity War, giving them the motivation to want to fight back and overturn everything that happened, and then seeing them going and revisiting some of the most iconic moments of the past in the MCU. Equal part fan service and drama, this movie did it so much better than the Star Wars movie that came out this year that I'm not even going to mention in the same breath as Avengers Endgame, and showed the people currently running Lucasfilm, as well as all of these other franchises that have tried to be Marvel, how to actually do a good ending. With that being said, this movie is far from perfect, and there's a number of things I wish that they had done differently, which I may address in a future video, especially in regards to the time travel element and how they dealt with Thanos. But considering just how many people dropped the ball with the ending of their own franchises, this movie could have gone so much worse than it did, and it ended up being a really good ending, which I think is what most MCU fans were really looking for. Dragon Ball Super Broly. And if you guys follow me over on Laughingstock Media, my anime and animation channel, you know that I had to include this movie on here, since I'm a huge fan of the Dragon Ball franchise and this movie was a lot of fun. Not only having incredible animation, but a mostly well written and executed story which was able to take the Broly character, who I never actually liked before this movie, and turned him into someone who was actually fleshed out and that I could actually root for and hope wouldn't be killed by the end. And the action in this movie is some of the best of the year. It was some of the most fun I had all year in a theater, and definitely worth being not only on my best anime list of 2019, but also my best movies. And it's definitely worth checking out for fans of Dragon Ball, which I'm sure you already have. My next movie on this list is Parasite, a South Korean movie directed by Bong Joon-ho, and starring one of my favorite South Korean actors, Kang Ho-sung. And this whole movie was just masterfully done, telling the story of a working-class family of con artists who works their way into the service of a wealthy, privileged family, and slowly tries to take everything of theirs for themselves. However, as they do this, they discover some shocking revelations that are going on inside the house, involving another group who's kind of doing the same thing. It's a story of classism done in a really great way, without being really overt or on the nose. Despite the main character's family doing some very underhanded things throughout the course of the movie, you still end up rooting for them and hoping they don't get caught, which leads to a lot of tension. However, in many ways, you also feel for the wealthy family. And all of this is tied together by some great acting, direction, and cinematography. So if you haven't checked this one out yet, I definitely recommend it. So before I get to my favorite movie of 2019, I did want to do some honorable mentions, with the first one being Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Now, I've always been a big fan of Pokemon ever since it first came to the United States back in the 1990s. I played almost all the games, and I enjoyed the anime when I was a kid, although I was always far more into the games than the anime itself. So when I heard they were finally gonna do a live-action Pokemon movie, I was a little bit concerned, especially when most video game and anime movies don't end up being very good. However, I thought this movie was pretty fun for what it was, and did a decent job of introducing the Pokemon world. Now, I'm sure that most fans, including myself, probably would have preferred to just see a straight-up Pokemon movie, where we follow a trainer as he goes on his Pokemon journey, trying to catch them all, maybe starting in the original Kanto region and going from there. But this movie, for me, seems like it was more of a test to see if they could actually get the Pokemon in the Pokemon world right. And while I feel like some of the designs for them, especially when it came to like Mewtwo and Charizard, weren't necessarily up to par, I'm sure that they could change that up in subsequent movies. Rambo: Last Blood. Now, this is a film that was really kind of unfairly treated by the media, especially with movie critics, in 2019, largely because it wasn't kowtowing to the current politics of today, especially when it came to immigration and how it portrayed Mexican cartels. But anyone with common sense would say that overall the portrayals in this movie aren't anywhere near as problematic as they made it out to be. Now, I wouldn't say this is the best Rambo movie or the best Stallone movie in a while, but Stallone does give a good performance as the character, and there is some really fun, entertaining action, especially in the climax of the film. And I feel like a lot of people who went to see this movie in theaters probably got what they were looking for by the film came to an end. Battle Angel Alita. Now, this is a movie I heard a lot about throughout the year of 2019, and I finally got the chance to check it out a few days ago. And while I did enjoy some aspects of the film, and there was some cool action, I do feel like the movie was a little bit overrated. Honestly, a lot of it comes off as rushed, and there's way too much CGI in the movie for me, especially when it comes to Alita herself, which, as an anime fan, I wasn't really that big of a fan of how they altered her face and her eyes to look more anime-esque. Although it does have an in-universe explanation, I thought it just ended up looking too fake. And that was the case for most of the villains as well. There was just way too much CGI in the movie, and I don't think that Robert Rodriguez was necessarily the right person to direct this. If James Cameron himself had done it, it probably would have been a lot better. However, I can see why a lot of people liked it, specifically because it actually had a female protagonist for once that wasn't just in your face, I'm a woman, every man is bad, like some other high-profile action movies of this year. But overall, I don't necessarily think it was quite as good as many people made it out to be. And finally, that leads into my number one movie of 2019, which is Joker, directed by Todd Phillips and starring Joaquin Phoenix. And once I heard that Joaquin Phoenix was cast to play the Joker, I knew this movie was gonna be something great, because he's always put in such great performances throughout the course of his career, such as in movies like The Master, Gladiator, and even a movie like Signs, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, who we could see in movies like The Happening doesn't always know how to get great performances out of his actors. Now, I wasn't too sure about Todd Phillips directing at first, or how the writing was gonna be, but when I actually went and saw this movie in theaters, it ended up being way better than I expected and blew my expectations away, giving us one of the best DC and general comic book movies since The Dark Knight came out years ago. With an incredible performance by Joaquin Phoenix, telling the story of Arthur Fleck as he continues to go through this downward spiral, going from a mentally ill, abused man in society to the crown prince of crime, the Joker, who is able to rise up and be the central figure in a revolution in Gotham City. This is another movie like Rambo Last Blood that the media and the critics were really trying to eviscerate when it was coming out, constantly trying to warn people that, oh no, incels are going to show up and shoot up movie theaters, and you should be careful if you want to go see this movie in theaters. The Joker is going to inspire violence, it's super violent. And then I go into this movie and I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you people this big a snowflakes that you can't even take seeing a movie like this, which isn't even as subversive or graphic as The Taxi Driver, which is a movie that heavily inspired this one? It was all just nothing more than the media once again being completely off the mark, and critics once again trying to suck up to the politics of today to try and shut down a great movie, which this movie is. I'm really looking forward to getting it on 4K Blu-ray and watching it and rewatching it for years to come. If they do a sequel, I'm gonna be there first day, just as I know many other people will as well, considering that this movie ended up rising to the #1 rated R box office movie of all time, and making an even higher profit than Avengers Endgame. That for me, as well as being a great movie, is enough to make it the #1 movie of 2019. Okay guys, so what do you think are the 10 best movies of 2019? Let me know down below in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can see all of my videos and community posts right away when they come out. Make sure to like this video and share it out on social media so we can continue to grow and bring you even more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.